Hello and welcome to the Army Museum in Bydgoszcz, Poland. In this video I'm going to take you around some of the equipment which is outside, and in another video you can see what's inside. Starting off with this, a Soviet T-34 with an 85mm gun on it, introduced in January 1944. This one is from the Polish army and it would be from the 1950s. The T-34 was used for a pretty long time, and what's curious is some of the things we can see on the outside. Here is engine oil in this canister, and if we come round to the other side we can see that it's got fuel. Now it does seem like not a particularly good idea to have fuel in such a place, but I do have an explanation. This probably or possibly wouldn't be used in combat situations. In the Second World War, and now I'm just quoting from the German army, the idea of the tank transporter wasn't very common, so you could have a situation where, for example, tanks could be loaded onto a train, but because of the situation after the invasion of the Second World War, there wasn't, particularly in 1941, the Germans did not have the infrastructure, so that the trains might be, because of the difference in the gauge between the Soviet and European gauges, so that the tanks would be taken off the trains at the border, or the former border of the Soviet Union, and then they might have to drive the rest of the way to the front, with all sorts of problems that this would have on, above all, engine oil and other parts. So by the time they got to the front, and this was a major problem by September 1941, they were often in very bad condition. Now I mention that because I think it's relevant, that it could be a similar situation with tanks like this. This is just a theory of mine. I don't think you'd want to take canisters holding fuel into battle with you. That's my opinion. I might be wrong. If you've got other ideas, you think, oh, it's no problem, then just write them down below. This is a Soviet T-72. Introduced, or prototypes were from the beginning of the 1960s. It's the main battle tank of the Soviet Union from 1979. Plenty of them can be seen on display in Afghanistan, for example. Now I've got a couple of missiles there as well. I think I'll do separate videos on them. And here we've got the artillery. Now most of this artillery is in fact Soviet artillery from the Second World War. Most of it, not all of it. Some of it's actually Polish artillery from before the war. So it's at 76mm, 57mm, 45mm, 1937 model of an anti-tank gun, which as it turned out wasn't much use from about 1941 onwards. So the anti-tank guns just got bigger and bigger. This is an anti-aircraft weapon, 14.5mm. Another one, and that's did you call it the tender? I can't remember the word for it, but that goes with that thing there. So it's used for transporting it around. Here we have an interwar Polish cannon. This was supplied to Italy. It seems it would have been captured in the September 1939 campaign, and it would have been sent to Italy sometime by the Germans, and this was actually in Siena for some considerable time, and it then found its way from Siena to here in November 2016. But this 100mm howitzer it was originally produced in Czechoslovakia, then it was produced in Howitzer and Stalowa Wola in Poland. Now we've got a siege gun here, which dates to the, I think it's before, it's a 19th century siege gun from Liège. I think we'll come on to them a bit later though. I'll take you around this spot first. We've got some mortars. 120mm mortar from 1943. Well, I wouldn't fancy carrying that thing around with me. A mortar on wheels, rocket launcher, heavy artillery here, or heavier, 152mm howitzer from 1943. And so by the time of the end of the war, for example, on the battle for Berlin, and you see the amount of them, of these things here, which were put into the front, it must have been pretty terrifying for the defenders. Obviously at the beginning of World War II, there wasn't a very great density of these things. Now we've got three, which I think are particularly interesting, Soviet anti-aircraft weapons, and they're all from before the war they were introduced. And so this is the 1939 version of 37mm anti-aircraft gun. Coming down here, we've got the 57mm anti-aircraft gun, which took a crew of 8. Had a range of nearly 9 kilometers. You see, there's more seating here than there is in a cinema. And here we have the 85mm, which was introduced also in 1939. Now you may say, seeing as the Soviets had these, how come the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was able to run amok in 1941? Well, the answer is there wasn't enough of them to do anything about the German advance. And a second point I would have to say, in my opinion, is that the crews could have been badly trained. They might have known what they were doing, which was very frequently the case in the Soviet army. Despite the fact that conscription had been extended in 1938, I think it was, despite this, many troops were not very well prepared at all. And here we have a howitzer from 1937 also. And this thing here looks quite impressive in many ways. I mean, it's in fantastic condition. So it's 85mm howitzer. It has a crew of 8, and it can fire 17 kilometers. Here we have a howitzer. A howitzer on wheels, and the wheels have got a track around them. Bydgoszcz. This is a weapon, prototyped in 1961, something like that, came into general service in the 1970s, and I have done a separate video on this. Thought this was particularly interesting. And I want to finish off with this one here, because I think this is rather odd. It's from Belgium, and it's a howitzer. And separate video on that one too. Right, so this is the Army Museum in Bydgoszcz in northern Poland, and I hope you found that of interest. I do lots of videos on military things, history obviously, and military history, so I hope that you will consider subscribing. Thanks very much for watching.